Dan kita ingin melihat kepada the morning after dan juga apakah pergerakan ke hadapan untuk melihat kepada bagaimana politik Sabah dan juga pilihan raya yang diadakan pada semalam akan memberikan satu dengan izinnya closure ataupun penutup kepada rakyat Sabah untuk memastikan bahawa segala harapan, segala keinginan yang mereka suarakan berkenaan dengan ekonomi, akses kepada pekerjaan, infrastruktur asas, semua ini dapat diselesaikan dan juga dapat bergerak ke hadapan untuk memastikan bahawa Sabah dapat bergerak ke hadapan. Kita bersama dengan pertama sekali tetamu kita pada pagi ini adalah Bridget Welsh, pendidik kehormat Institut Pendidikan Asia Universiti Nottingham, Malaysia, untuk membincangkan berkenaan dengan the way forward dan juga bagaimanakah rakyat di Sabah melihat kepada keputusan yang berlaku pada diumumkan pada lewat tengah malam semalam. Dan juga Bridget ketika ini berada di Sabah dan beliau telah lama berada di Sabah sekitar sebulan untuk melihat kepada situasi dan juga apakah yang berlaku di lapangan. Bridget, hi, good morning Bridget.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Bridget.
Morning already.
I think first of all, let's look at the situation. You mentioned during our phone call earlier that the situation is still developing in Sabah. Tell us more about that and what can we expect next in the next few hours?
So over the last few hours, after the election results have come in, there has been contestation over who will become the chief minister. There are two different levels of discussion. The first involves the discussion within GRS, within the coalition in terms of the different parties, particularly between Bersatu, UMNO, PBS, and STAR. So there has been some intense negotiation. And then there's a second side of things, which is that Warasan has refused to concede defeat because they interpreting the Constitution and two articles of the Constitution, which believes that which involve that the largest party, not an alliance, the largest party is the one who can form and become the chief minister. So there are two articles in the Sabah Constitution. Article 6.3, which says that it has to be who can command the majority of the House, and Article 6.7, which has to be the largest party. Warasan won the most seats, 29 seats. So there's contestation, and so they are saying that they should be the one to be able to form the government. So we see a situation where there are different legal interpretations, and neither side is giving up. GRS is not an official alliance. So the parties are the ones that are within it, not necessarily. So PN, BN, two different other alliances, but GRS as an alliance is not official. So as a consequence, we're seeing continued intensification, conflict over who should have the right to form the government, given the closeness of the results yesterday.
Bridget, so could this mean that this, even after the election, even after the mandate from the people, this could drag on for a few more days? Do you foresee that?
Possible, but the negotiations are very intense. I think that there was a rehearsal for a swearing-in ceremony earlier this morning, and there's supposed to be discussion that there will be one held later this morning. But I think that what we're going to see is that it's not necessarily clear who will become the chief minister, and then whoever becomes the chief minister will likely have a legal challenge against that person because of the different interpretations in the Constitution. Unless there is some sort of significant change in terms of political loyalties. So one of the things that's being discussed is whether or not certain parties will join with other parties. And this is something that is evolving. So yes, a few days. It could be sooner if the negotiations work out. It could be later if there are renegotiations. So I think that it is something that is still, there is a lack of clarity in terms of the second step of who becomes the chief minister and whom within that will form the government.
And Bridget, you also mentioned that the GRS is not an official alliance. So what does that mean? Because I think during the election, we know that Barisan and also Bersatu came under this one umbrella and they moved forward. But does that mean that they will not be able to form a government because it's an unofficial alliance?
Well, it's not official, right? So that because it's not legal, it cannot be actually. They cannot form the government as GRS. They can form the government as other entities that are legally registered. So Kerajaan Nasional has 17 seats that are within it. So that and of course UMNO also has a number of seats as well. So that that's not UMNO, it's BN is the way that it's being registered officially according to the official results. So GRS is not itself is not a legally entity, so that it itself as GRS cannot form the government, but other parties within it. But the problem that PN and BN face is that they are not the largest party. Warisan is the largest party. So there are two different conflicting elements within the Sabah Constitution. And Warisan is not conceding defeat because they know that they are the largest party. And by the Sabah Constitution, it's the largest party that should be able to form the government.
Okay, and Bridget, also Warisan Plus, or if we just look at Warisan has 23 seats, and also DAP, which contested under the logo of Warisan. Warisan's logo, they have about 6 seats, 29 seats. That will probably amount to about 39% of the seats of the in the state legislative. So is that enough, even with that mandate? If we look at the Constitution 6/7, is that even enough to command a good, strong, or form a good, strong government?
Belum lagi, not yet. I think this is where we're seeing a situation of potential negotiation and people moving in different ways. Neither side, has the legal mandate, complete legal mandate, to be able to fulfill both elements of the Constitution. So for Warisan, they're the largest party, but they don't yet command the majority of the House. They don't have, and in the case of GRS, they command at this point, depending on the negotiations, they command the majority of the House, but they're not the largest party.
And according to Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, Hajiji would probably become the next CM if GRS wins the election. On the other hand, Barisan Nasional has put forth Datuk Sri Bong Mokhtar. There's also talks on Twitter saying that Masidi Manjun should become the next CM. There's all these different names floating around right now. What do you make of that? And do you think GRS could come up with a single name this morning before an audience at the Istana?
Well, I think this is something that is really testing not only Sabah, but it also is testing Malaysia. The relationship between Bersatu and UMNO. Will they be able to reach accommodation? They have in the past, and then we'll see whether or not they can reach an accommodation between choosing Hajiji Noor, which is the candidate that was the leading, most senior person in the context of Bersatu, or if it is someone like Bung Mokhtar, Raden, who is the senior person for UMNO. Masidi is in the running. He is, because he's seen as very capable. He won a very large majority last night in terms of his seat, and I think so. There are other contenders within that group that may be part of a compromise. But for now, there are two different actors. But keep in mind, for GRS, it's not just about these two parties, Bersatu and UMNO. It's also about PBS and STAR, because each of them have 6 seats, and they represent the Karazan Dusun Nguruk community in terms of these seats predominantly, but also they can move, and they have to be accommodated and agree to the CM. And so I think that this is a test for Muhyiddin Yassin to be able to see whether or not he can get the 4 major parties to agree. And in terms of a large, comfortable majority, this also involves trying to work with the independents. And keep in mind, in the context of UMNO, there are 2 different groups. There's the Bung Mokhtar group, and then there are, of course, people who are loyal to Musa Aman. And disproportionately of the seats that UMNO has won, the majority of those are seen to be Musa's people who are connected to Musa. So this also factors in terms of who becomes the chief minister candidate. Of all of these, I think Hajiji Noor has the advantage, but it's of course because PN has won the most seats. But the question becomes whether or not they can reach accommodation among themselves. And keep in mind, there is a tradition of intense competition in Sabah.
But, well, Bridget, let's just put aside the political numbers on who will have the absolute voice in the State Assembly. We should go back to the people, because the people have spoken yesterday, and the most important thing at the moment is to manage the perception and the expectation of the people. So how can, moving forward, how can the government elected manage to manage these two, the expectation and the perception of the people?
So, sister, this is one of the reasons that we see such a very significant challenge, because the people are divided, very sharply divided. Warisan has won the popular vote by a small amount, while GRS parties have won the amount of seats, 38 to 32, but it is still very fluid in terms of the potential. There are divisions within GRS in terms of many people, for example, voted for PBS. They didn't vote necessarily for PN. And keep in mind that in some of the seats that they voted for PBS, there was a PN candidate, so they chose not to vote for PN. So the fact of the matter is that the divisions, the polarization in the electorate is contributing to the sense that it's not a clear mandate. And this is where legal interpretations and negotiations at the elite level will be very important to decide how it moves forward. It is not a clear mandate in any way or form. If we look specifically also at the fact that voter turnout was very low. It was 66.6%. So, in fact, a large number of people did not come out at all. Many Sabahans did not come home to vote during this COVID-19 period. So it's not a clear mandate. It's a divided mandate, and that makes it much more challenging.
Well, Bridget, you've been in Sabah for quite some time for this state election, and I'm sure you've known the people very well. So what are the top of the list of the issues that will be highlighted by this elected government?
I think the economy is the most important issue for most of the voters. And we're seeing many voters particularly struggling during the COVID-19 period. We see the management of COVID-19, which has been a very serious issue in Sabah in the last few weeks in terms of the case numbers. We also see the issues of poverty in the context of Sabah, because 20% of the households in Sabah are under the poverty line. We also see a situation in Sabah where there is concern that the federal government does not has too much power. Federal-state relations are both in a positive and a negative way. How much the federal helps, how much it is seen to be not helping, are things that are in the mind of a lot of our individuals. But many Sabahans voted for their local representative, for their local candidates. So we see this issue of the fact that they don't look at the national picture or even the state picture when they were voting. So it makes this much more complicated. Moving forward, Sabahans have unique challenges in terms of poverty level and infrastructure and much more increased diversity in its society. But the same issues that concern most Malaysians, the economy, COVID-19 livelihoods, are still very paramount, still very important.
Well, on a bigger picture, because we should also look into issues of federalism, how do you see the reconciliation between state government and federal government at this point of time?
Sadly, there is no reconciliation. I think there are lots of tensions, and I think that the history of Sabah federal-state relationship involving illegal immigration, which was a factor in this election, involving issues of resources and oil revenue, the interpretations and the requirements of the Malaysia Agreement of 1963, these things still persist in the relationship. And this is one of the challenges of understanding Sabah politics, is that the past is very present in many voters and the perception, that the sense that the federal government needs to do more to help Sabah, to provide more of its resources back to Sabah in its oil and gas revenue, for example. So I think these are issues that remain ongoing, and I think I would expect that these will be also part of the negotiations. In terms of who is running Sabah, but also how the federal-state relationship may transform. I expect that there will be offers to try to address some of these issues, But the fact of the matter is, many of those offers have come in the past and not been delivered on. So there are understandable resentments among many parts of the society about the federal-state relationship.
Let's look at what you tweeted, I think it was yesterday, around 9 p.m. Money, machinery, low voter turnout and splitting as lower class or lower income voters. Female and Muslim votes swung back to PN, BN. KDM vote remain undivided, ubah balik as voters says. This reconciliation of the East Coast, West Coast voters, this polarizing voters in Sabah, do you think this new government, whoever it may be, has this power and the willingness to reconcile these different polarizing voters? And on the MA63 that you mentioned earlier, also on that, do you think this Sabah for Sabahan, Sabah and the federal government narratives, how do you think this will impact the MA63 negotiation moving forward? Because we saw how Petronas is paying Sarawak for its SST on the oil revenue. Do you think Sabah is strong enough to move forward, with the GRS or Warisan Plus to get their share of the revenue from Petronas?
Many questions there,
yes.
especially after a long night. So let me see if I can unpack some of these. I think that generally, I think that what we're seeing is that the Sabah election points to the fact that many Sabahans want a reassessment of the federal-state relationship. And we have seen steps on the national landscape to try to address some of those issues in terms of royalty payments, in terms of discussions. And I think those discussions have to continue. There has to be greater resolution of these sets of issues that many people in Sabah and in Sarawak need to address. And among those are not just issues of resources, but also issues involving the infrastructure, representation, involving addressing some of the legacies of the past in the context of Sabah, the issues of illegal immigration. So these are real significant policy challenges. The issue is, however, is that the politicking of trying to, which exists on two levels, right? It exists, one in Sabah itself, and let's not forget, also at the national stage, because of the issue of the majorities being weak, the numbers and defections. These are same patterns that are happening both in Sabah and nationally. So in order to have these issues addressed, there needs to be some sort of compromise. There needs to be some sort of political stability. And the fact of the matter is that this is not there right now at this particular juncture. So, yes, I think there is more attention, there is more focus on some of these issues, but at the same juncture, there is also a political context that makes deliverables on these areas significantly challenging. Now,
Bridget,
the other aspect of this discussion is that we see a lot of the divisions, and I think the campaign fed on and expanded on those divisions. And I think that this is a problem not just within Sabah, but also within the national stage. The issues of ethnicity and race are very sensitive, but they're also being politicized, and they have been for decades, and they continue to be so. And that creates a real challenge because it also, particularly what we're seeing in this election, the Karazan Dusun Muruk community are very important to decide who will be the director, the leadership in Sabah. And I think that these two parties, PBS and STAR, have a lot of influence in setting that direction.
Bridget, yesterday we spoke to a few political analysts, and all of them have one common findings, that the people, politicians in Sabah are too busy politicking. So, what are your personal appeal to them? Because they should go back to people's mandate, how to develop this state, and instead put aside whatever differences they have.
Well, I would say that more generally that many of Malaysian politicians, both in the federal level, in Semenanjung and also in Sabah, spend a lot of time politicking. I think that, and now the question, and most Malaysians, as you rightly imply in your question, would rather they focus on governing and addressing the problems of ordinary Malaysians. And I think these elements were very much in part of how people voted, right? But there are different interpretations of which problems need to be addressed first, and also there are different interpretations of who can carry these, who can address this more effectively. And I think that that's where we see this polarization, these splits within the context of Malaysian politics, which exist at the national level as much as they do at the federal level. Now, but what we are seeing is a situation, I think, of all the states in the country, Sabah is one of the most important in where that across the political divide, people communicate with each other. There is a sense that the antagonism is not that strong, and I think many Sabahans put aside the differences of politics in many ways in order to address these sets of issues. So I am cautiously hopeful that we will see some of that happening. So when many people sort of focus on the negative things of the defections and in terms of and movement in terms of political alliances, which do betray the will of the people in these contexts, at the same time, when you saw some defections can actually serve to create stability to allow the government to move forward. So this is what happened, for example, in 2018. When defections moved to support Shafi Abdal at that time. So we will see whether or not there are similar defections that take place for the interest of trying to have a stable government to focus on the problems that Sabahans face. And they are very serious challenges here, in some ways more serious than elsewhere in Malaysia, that need the collaboration and statesman-like leadership. And I think that this is where Muhyiddin Yassin, Shafi Abdal, the leaders of PBS, STAR, Jeffrey Kittingan, and Matsili Ompili will make a big difference in terms of what decisions they make in the near future.
But, Bridget, but I must ask this, but you've been there. Personally, do you feel the struggle of Sabahan? Can you walk in their shoes?
I will tell you, to see the poverty in Sabah is something that really is very upsetting. The struggle that people are facing, especially in parts of the state where they have no water, running water, no electricity, and you can feel it. Yesterday in Kota Bulut, you can see the homeless people. In Pitas, you can see people who don't have houses that are functioning, that are leaking, that don't have the basic needs. There is an urgent need to address these issues in a more collaborative way. A committee on poverty, looking and reassessing this, looking at addressing the corruption that causes many of the issues of infrastructure not to be given to the people. I think there needs to be something that is depoliticizing and more attention to the real dire needs, especially of those who live under the poverty line. This is 20% of Sabah. 20% of the households of Sabah. So it's an estimated 615,000 people, and that really are desperately struggling. And keep in mind that this is also these numbers are before COVID-19. So across Sabah and parts of Sarawak as well, but in many other parts of Malaysia, like Kelantan, for example, there are very high levels of poverty, and it's not in the urban and in the rural areas. And so this is where the government can actually do much more to address these needs in a more meaningful way, and that means looking at some of the things more holistically and recognizing the differences, struggles that different communities face, not using a one-size-fits-all approach to looking at the issues of poverty.
And Bridget, new party or the newcomer party Cinta Sabah was vehemently rejected yesterday. Could this hint to how new parties would perform in the upcoming general election, looking at how big names are still dominating the political scene in Sabah?
Well, we did see 3 independents win. So personality factors were very important. In the cases of the new parties coming in, they did not do as well. Anifa Aman, for example, did not win in Bungawan, but it was a very close race. So I think that new parties face a difficult struggle in terms of having machinery on the ground, especially in a state like Sabah where you need to mobilize the voters. But keep in mind that PN and Bersatu as a new party in Sabah did very well. And it did well for two reasons. One, it relied on older incumbents such as Haji Jinor, Masidi, among others. As well as the fact that it had a lot of resources at its disposal, being in federal government and financial resources. A lot of money was played on the ground in this election. So as a consequence, new parties, it depends on where they come from and who they work with. But generally, smaller new parties and incumbents and independent parties did not do well. LDP, PCS, Parti Cinta Sabah did not do well. So I think that if we look at the context of some party in the national stage, say Mahathir's party, Berjuang, we would see this to face a big obstacle, not only for other reasons involving Tun Mahathir, but also involving the issues of machinery and how to build a new party, especially in more rural and seats that involve heavy mobilization of voters. The campaign in Sabah had a lot of money that was used to influence voters, and it also cost a lot of money in terms of transporting voters to the polls and bringing voters back to vote, which still was a lot less in number, but it was a lot of money that was involved in terms of these costs. And I think this is a real obstacle that new parties face.
Okay. Bridget, briefly before we end this interview, best case scenario for today and worst case scenario for today, briefly, Bridget.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is the scenario is the same, in the sense that that whoever becomes the chief minister will have to. The worst case scenario is that there will be no chief minister at ongoing negotiations. The best case scenario is that someone finds enough seats to be able to form the government, but there will probably be a legal challenge. So the reality is that at this point, unless there's some fundamental shifts and realignments, I think the scenario points to continued uncertainty that comes from Sabah, which spills over to the national stage, because this affects the relations between national parties as well and the future of the government. So this, of course, ironically, that this election being pushed for has actually now had an ironic implication of destabilizing government as opposed to setting more clarity.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Bridget.
you, Bridget.
Bridget Welsh.
Have a nice morning, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a nice morning to you too. Itu tadi Bridget Welsh daripada University of Nottingham membincangkan berkenaan dengan the morning after di Sabah dan